Hello, I'm Dr. John Smelcer, and welcome to another episode of Ahtna 101. This special episode is about basically the Spanish flu of 1918. We're in the middle of the coronavirus outbreak here in America, and a lot has been said on TV and the news about how the parallels between this and the 1918 Spanish flu, which killed some estimated or revised estimated 50 to 100 million people worldwide but towards the end and after the end of World War I. The Spanish flu actually lasted for decades. It didn't just end in 1918, it began in 1918, but it went all the way up through the 50s. And it hit Alaska particularly hard in remote places, villages, native villages, even in the 20s. And my grandmother and her sister, Maury, her older sister, lived in a village that was hit, struck by the pandemic. And, across the world, it only was killing about 3% of the population, maybe even only about 2%, even though the numbers seemed high, but it was only about 2 or 3% of the world population. When it hit Alaska, though, especially among natives, it was more like 50, 60, 70, 75% of native people died from it. In some cases, entire villages were wiped out. In my own grandmother's family, almost every single person died, but her and her sister. I know my mentor, who's related to my grandma, so he's related to me, Walter Charlie, he talked often up to me about how he lost his entire family during that Spanish flu pandemic. It really decimated Alaska, not just lives, but culture and language as well. The language and culture of Alaska Natives were already kind of waning because of Western European contact, missionaries, all that kind of contact. But the final death nail, in a way, was the Great Death, because it wiped out the population so much, broke up communities, and a lot of native children were sent off to boarding schools during that period, that it never quite recovered, the languages and the culture. And to this day, they continue to vanish. Ahtna has very few speakers left, as I've talked to you about in the past. So over the years, especially through the 80s and the 90s, I used to interview elders across Alaska, including my grandmother and her sister, and Walter Charlie. And I'd interview them about the Great Death. That's what Alaska Natives called that period, the Great Death. And most elders hardly ever talked about it. Almost never. A lot of elders never really talk about their boarding school experience, but the Great Death was something they really didn't talk about. At one point, I was the executive director of Ahtna's Heritage Foundation. And I remember one spring and summer looking for a site, a place where we could build our summer camp, where we would spend about a week having elders teach members of the tribe all kinds of things from our traditional native ways of knowing. And I found this one site I really liked. And I went to the elders in the community and I said, "Oh, can we build it there? That's a perfect place for it." And I remember it clearly. They said, "Oh, no, that's where there used to be a village. And during that plague, everybody died, and the spirits are still there. And we're not going to go there. It's forbidden to go there." And that was pretty much the end of it. And I've never forgotten that impact of that period is still with us. This was 1996, so even all those years later. And over the years, from all my interviews with people, I wrote a book, and it's called The Great Death. And it's basically based on my grandmother and her sister. That was the American edition, and this is the British edition of the same book. And I remember I was interviewed on National Public Radio about the book. And right after I got off, Dr. Tom Niswander, an epidemiologist from the University of Alaska's WWAMI medical program, that's in association with the University of Washington, he got on and talked all about the epidemiology of it, how it came, why it decimated so many Alaska Native peoples. And so I just wanted to tell you during this time that there's a connection to our history that some of my family lived through and spoke a lot about. And I hope that you would consider maybe reading The Great Death. All right, stay tuned for another episode of Ahtna 101.